Hey, movie lovers, welcome back for another Anatomy of a Movie here at the Popcorn Talk Network. Today we go all the way back to England a couple centuries ago with Robin Hood stealing from the rich and giving to the poor, so stay tuned.
Welcome to Popcorn Talk, featuring movie discussion, news, and interviews. Popcorn Talk, we talk movies. And now, here's Popcorn Talk's Anatomy of a Movie.
That's right, ladies and gentlemen, we get another rendition of the Robin Hood tale in the latest installment, 2018, produced by Leonardo DiCaprio of all people. But that is the movie we're talking about. Here today we have Marisa Serafini.
Hello, everyone.
I am Phil Svitek. Missing in action is Dimitri Panos, because it's a Tuesday for us here with coming to the end of the year with lots of movies. We've got kind of a crazy schedule, so do keep checking back in with us. Hopefully, we'll cover all the movies that you so desire.
Right, Dimitri's off fighting in the Crusades right now. That's why he's not here.
Yes, he is. That's why we're so poor. We've been funding the war effort.
Yeah, it's a noble effort for him.
Yes. Those are inside jokes, which let me kind of backtrack and tell you a couple of things. First off, if you don't understand those jokes, that's because you probably haven't seen the movie. In which case, I highly, highly recommend doing so first because we are a spoiler-filled review / in-depth discussion. We're not just simply reviews. Yes, we're going to talk about the storylines and the plot lines, so forth, but we're going to go in a little bit deeper. We're going to talk about how things got made, the cinematography, the editing, all that good stuff, culminating into a box office, or in this case, an unfortunate box office.
Yeah.
Also, if you want to follow along, we do have our rundown in the description box. It's a little PDF. You just click it and you can follow along. Lastly, the conversation is never complete without you, so we do encourage you to comment along. Let us know your thoughts and opinions. You can also interact with us directly. We'll give out our social media handles at the end. So there you have it, and if I haven't done so, welcome to the show. We appreciate you being here, and where we usually kick off is with our overall thoughts on the movie. So Marisa, let me kick it off to you.
You know, I was actually excited for this one, Robin Hood. The trailer seemed fun, seemed comedic. We're a fan of Taron Egerton. We've covered, all the Kingsman movies and his Eddie the Eagle one as well. So, I like Taron. He's a fun actor, and especially for someone who's young and still kind of up and coming in the Hollywood scheme, I like him. So I was excited to see this one because I knew it was going to be fun. I knew it was going to be funny. And overall, I actually did enjoy it. I mean, it is the same tale told again a million times. We see different characters of the same names, but their own personal spins on them. Still fun. Didn't seem original, but there were moments I was like, that's cool. Haven't seen that in the other Robin Hood movies. And overall, it was actually very entertaining. I liked this film more than, unfortunately, other people did. It's a fun popcorn film.
Yeah, I enjoyed it as well, too. I thought it was enjoyable, and, I understand it's not a great movie, but I think it's a good movie. It's a solid movie. I think it's got some action. I think it does have some heart, believe it or not. And, maybe it's because I'm a Robin Hood fan, from Robin Hood Prince of Thieves to Men in Tights. To even, of course, the Disney one. We'll talk about kind of how this stacks up to the other ones, but overall, I thought it brought something fresh. It's kind of a weird amalgamation where it's not historically accurate. It's got some modern age stuff, but mixed with old, and maybe that was kind of what was the most off-putting. I think if it was just slightly, maybe a little bit older, I think people would have enjoyed it a little bit more, because I do think it has, story-wise, beat for beat, it's actually got a pretty good story, and it's acted very well for my money's worth.
Right, and I think we had a great villain and antagonist in this film, and you wanted to steal from him and have him get his comeuppance too, so I think as likable as the protagonist was with Taron Egerton, that's as dislikable we had with Ben Mendelsohn, who played the sheriff. And I think it was great. And they had a lot of great scenes together because you don't really see that in the other Robin Hood adaptations. You don't see a lot of actual kind of camaraderie interactions. You only see really just conflict, but not working together. And I think that was fresh. And interesting to see that type of dynamic that they try playing out.
Yeah, it kind of reminded me of The Mask of Zorro in a sense, where you had to infiltrate the rich people's layer, if you will, to figure out the game plan and kind of pretend to be part of them, but really you're helping out the poor. So I thought it had those elements, and I thought that definitely was a fresh take. And this idea that because Robin of Loxley was always Robin of Loxley, but we forget, and it's not as well told, that side of it, that he does come from wealth to a certain extent, and so that kind of coming to fruition, and also this idea that he is, in essence, he's not like the leader that he always is portrayed to be. Like he has this beginning to it, and he starts a revolution in essence, and I appreciated kind of the origin story of that.
Yeah, I like it, and it's fun to see the rise of a unlikely hero, you can say. I mean, we saw the backstory of him at the Crusades, which is actually pretty cool to see just his experience and how he fights, and that mentality and mindset that he brought back with him home to now it's believable as audience that's like, yeah, he has that skill set. He can totally be the Robin Hood that we know to be. But to see from point A to point B, it's fun to see that progression and journey and character development wise. And I liked it because you do see those moments of humanity with him, especially with the Crusades when he was trying to do the right thing and save someone because, they were so merciless. Who's really the good guy here? They're supposed to be the good guys, but yet you see them in like animalistic ways and just savagely killing people, and you're like, that's not good either. So I like that the backstory with the Crusades showed he is ultimately a good guy who knows right from wrong.
Yeah, interestingly enough, it kind of almost reminded me of like Batman Begins to a certain extent, because that movie, Batman goes away and then comes back to Gotham and sees all the bad things that have taken place in his city, and to a certain extent, that's a hyperized version of what the world is or was back in that day. And so this kind of, it's like an alternate universe in essence. It's not quite the medieval times we know, but it's, imagine if certain things went a little bit different.
Yeah.
Let's backtrack really quick. This love affair for Robin Hood is interestingly enough because Disney was working on one called Nottingham and the Hood. Sony was doing one called Hood, and then kind of became this third script in essence, and came together for this with Lionsgate getting their hands on it. Leonardo DiCaprio with his production company, Appian Way, still being attached to produce, and just even by the title alone, right, The Hood. I appreciate that. Like what reminded me most about kind of, I guess, Batman Begins was the fact that, unlike past versions that I've seen, Robin Hood is always, he's known for who he is. Mm-hmm. It's Robin of Loxley. There's no question about it. But here, he's called the Hood for a reason, because he wears a hood and you don't know who he is. So I thought that was an interesting element to add to it, and something that obviously both studios were kind of playing with.
Right, and I like that. That was kind of like their compromise, because then they couldn't get the movie title, Hood. So they're like, well, let's put it in the actual script. And I think that's where they had to meet halfway. But it also does help having Robin Hood in the title, because it is an iconic story that people know. So it does help with just the marketing aspect. If you had a title called Hood, it opens, it makes it way more ambiguous. Like,
and be like, Little Red Riding Hood?
Is a neighborhood? Yeah, Little Red Riding Hood. They're like, it's too broad of a term to understand. It's a Robin Hood story. So I don't mind that they put Robin Hood in the title. I felt it could be a little bit more original, maybe like Robin Hood and the Crusades or whatever. But I think it's interesting because this is such a story that's repeated so many times. And there's like 2 other projects working on it at the same time that it is famous. People know about it. So I like how there's collaboration for something. Yeah, it's an old story, but it still felt modern in some ways watching it.
So let me ask you this. Which of the Robin Hoods are you familiar with in terms of movies or just the classic, let's say, fables or folklore, rather?
I will, of course, know the Disney one, but the awesome Foxx.
That's 1973.
1973. That one I was exposed to a lot as a kid. I made Anthony, our engineer, who's producing us right now, listen to the opening music to that just a few weeks ago. So I am exposed to that one a lot. Of course, Mel Brooks' Men in Tights, because that one is fun and hysterical, and also Kevin Costner's. So those are like the three that I'm more familiar with.
Yeah, Prince of Thieves, the Kevin one is very... I thought it was the most kind of realistic, and it was the most hard. I actually haven't seen the Russell Crowe one, believe it or not. Although, a lot of signs point to that it was going to be a good movie. I just never got around to it. What I appreciate the message of Robin Hood, steal from the rich, give to the poor, is kind of universal. I think there's a lot of countries, perhaps more in Europe. I'd have to kind of think of ones in America, but it's a very noble cause, and every nation seems to have its own folklore. But Robin Hood's the one that just kind of stood the test of time overall. Yeah. When you kind of... This movie had all those traits except for one thing. Prince John. Because we get the sheriff, and he was the antagonist. And normally it's the prince and the sheriff, and the sheriff is kind of out doing the bidding of the prince, but not this time.
No, the sheriff's doing all the work.
Yes.
And I like that because sheriff is the main antagonist. He's the one that you have to fight throughout the entire thing. But it just shows how cold of a villain that he is, because this is all his doing. Literally, he's the one, it's his idea. People are stealing the money, and he has his lackeys, what have you, but it's his decision. And then seeing him pair up with someone else just to take over, you're like, oh, so you understand why he's doing all this and, stealing from everybody. But I like it because Ben Mendelsohn is so good at playing villains.
Yeah, I thought he did wonderful. But sticking to that, just kind of the basic tropes, right? What trope did you enjoy seeing most in this movie before we dive deeper into, the sheriff?
I really, it's not so much a trope, but just the consistency of the friendships of Robin and his quote-unquote merry men. When you have Little John, I think this relationship between Little John and Robin Hood in this one is that Robin Hood tried saving Little John's son, and I think that's a story I haven't seen before, and I thought that was fresh, and it gave a more realistic humanity type of backstory of why they would be friends and work together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you get it all. You get Friar Tuck, you get Maid Marian, which I appreciated, like how that storyline kind of began the journey. Normally, obviously, they're love interest, but we don't get the context of how they came into be, and her starting off as a thief, and him, coming to that life was very much apropos, if you will. Mm-hmm. I guess the only thing about John is that they didn't call him Little John.
Little John, just John.
Which is a translation of his Arab name. So yeah, it had all those elements, and as far as it had an interesting take on it as far as a mentor relationship, because normally Robin Hood is always Robin Hood and doesn't need to learn. And as much as you said, like he learned in the Crusades, that only got him to a certain level. It was Little John who needed to take him further. Yeah,
to amp his training and skill set and make him become even a better archer than he already was. And I like that because it shows Robin Hood was good on his own, but with the help of Little John, he became great. And also simultaneously now having a purpose of why being Robin Hood, what did they stand for, why they were doing all of it. It just added more meaningfulness to all their actions.
Yeah, and then that was the big kind of heartbreaking moments of the movie when Rob, as they call him, or Loxley, he couldn't tell Maid Marian that, the one thing that he comes back for, and you could tell that she's, at least for me, that she was so torn initially, and you kind of wanted to get back with him now that she found out he wasn't dead, and he would have loved that, except he can't have her because that would compromise things.
Right, and I think that was interesting too because we're always rooting for Robin and Marion to be together because that's the whole story of their relationship. But I did find it believable because it's not like she was cheating on him. She was actually fully led to believe that he was dead. Therefore, she moved on, and you're like, okay, she's not bad in that sense. But you also know that Will Scarlet is not good. That's a doomed relationship because it's supposed to be Robin and Marion. I like that because it did show conflict. I think some of the chemistry was there. I found them actually very believable together.
Yeah, I did too, and even their looks, like whenever they had close-ups, I thought were very telling of their emotions. And as far as Maid Marian, there's in a couple of versions, she's always a cheerleader for Robin Hood's cause. But I thought this movie, she was one of the more active Maid Marians that I've ever seen.
I agree. She's definitely active in the political sense, standing up for what was right. And I like this is why I say it does feel modern a little bit, because we know with movies now, women are becoming like stronger characters, and the part that she's actually part of the fight, because there have been past Robin Hoods and adaptations that she's kind of like the damsel in distress, but this one she's no damsel, and I enjoyed that. Yeah,
and I thought that worked really well, and it furthered the relationship of Robin and her, because he doesn't want to get her involved. That's why he's not telling her. He's trying to be as protective as he can. Yet their lives combine, and in fact, what makes the relationship stronger at the end is as she tells him, like, I always knew you were meant for this. And they're both for the cause and doing whatever they can, and it's not just her sort of being like, you go, guy, essentially being a cheerleader.
Right. And I like how she was already politically active before Robin came back from the Crusades. She already knew what was right and what was wrong, what the sheriff was doing. So I like how she was already against the fight. And then now seeing Robin Hood also for the fight, you're like, yeah, they do belong together because they're fighting for the same thing.
Yeah, and her and Friar Tuck, I thought this was a really good rendition of Friar Tuck. He's always an interesting character, I think a fun character, certainly from the Disney movie in particular. Right. Which, by the way, apologies if we haven't seen all the rest of them. There are a lot of great versions of them, so I'd be curious to know if you've seen the other ones, what your favorite is. But going back to Friar Tuck, he had a compassion to him, and yet an odd fate. Like, I think they deliberately made him look a certain way, which gets noted throughout the film. But you could see his tenderness and his courage throughout. I thought it was just a great performance overall.
Yeah, and I really liked their fun relationship that they had, that brotherhood kind of camaraderie, and even the moment where like they were pretending, quote unquote, that he did the thievery, the robbery, and getting defracked and stuff. But that actually led to like a real true moment of conflict. You're like, oh crap, this could go south real quick. But the humor that was followed throughout, he was like, that was one of the best things ever. Kind of liberating in that sense. So I really liked that friendship between Robin Hood and Friar Tuck, because that felt like a real brohood.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we talk about the sheriff, one of the pivotal moments in the movie is kind of when they're in that town square, let's say, and Robin Hood reveals himself, who he actually is. I thought that was a very powerful scene, actually, just the way he delivers everything and what that represents of him taking off the mask, because for up until that point, it was essentially the poor against the rich. But now this was someone, quote unquote, rich on their side. And, early on in the film, there was a big point of like, oh, we have to account for the Loxley vote. It's like, oh, well, he's dead. No, he's not.
Nope. And he's like, oh, shoot. No one else knows. And I like that because it does show, like, literally the revealing of oneself. Shows that you can relate to him, because if he's hiding behind a mask and a hood, he's just another guy. But like once you feel like know who the true self is, you can get on board with that, and you're like, yeah, I can fight with you now that I know your true identity, that I know your true purpose. And I like that, and I think that was a great speech that he had, like riveting. I would vote for him.
And I think as symbolically it does represent a lot more, because they had a lot of the hoods, that became a symbol, right? Almost like if someone started putting up a Batman mask, or certainly how they have the light
insignia, yeah.
And whereas this, by him revealing himself, it was actually a greater purpose, because he represents the rich and being able to convert them. So that I thought it was powerful. Now, along there too, him and Will shook hands. In the sort of climax of everything, Robin makes a very deliberate decision to go back and save Will, but Will essentially turns. Mm-hmm. What do you think of?
Will's bitter because Robin got his woman.
Was that all? But I think he had a greater purpose, because even when Maid Marian was like, "Hey, let's do this," and even if she said like, "I love you," he was much more into the political leadership aspect of it and taking advantage of everything, rather than just Maid Marian, being petty over Maid Marian.
Right, and then I definitely saw there was a power struggle with Will, because I think Robin Hood even said, "I understand why these people follow you. They listen to you." And all that. And you can definitely see Will enjoyed that. He enjoyed the power that he has influence on people. And I think that's just that power struggle that Will has, that he wants to be in a position of authority. Not to control, but for people to listen to him and to take action in that way. Those are his steps. So I definitely saw a power monger with Will.
Yeah, he's an opportunist, and I thought it was a very interesting inclusion of him, because at first, he did represent that side of, well, why? We should have someone who's out in the open, representing us, rather than Robin Hood, this masked figure. And when you find out that he really is just about for himself. Mm-hmm. I almost kind of don't know which one of them is worse. I mean, the movie obviously ends on Will now taking the mantle of the sheriff. So I guess in that sense, the movie's saying Will is actually worse than the sheriff, because he's a liar, whereas certainly the sheriff is a liar to his people, but his motive is very singular.
Yeah.
Ultimately.
And is somewhat of a hypocrite because he turned on his own friends.
Yeah.
So, you don't like him in that sense, just for the morality of his character. You don't like that if he can do that to his friends, he's easily going to do that to the people that he doesn't care about, quote unquote. And it just makes him more dislikable on different levels as a villain.
Absolutely. So let us talk about the villain. Ben Mendelsohn, we saw him in Ready Player One as a great villain.
Saw him in Star Wars as a good villain as well.
And now we see him here. So I really liked his portrayal. I thought he had a lot of great nuances to the role. And I thought the way he introduced Robin Hood into his inner circle, I felt very motivated. It wasn't like one of those oh, you're just so stupid type of things.
Right. It felt earned. I was like, I wouldn't want to be in the same room as Sheriff, because of his dark ways, how he uses people to do his work, his mindset when he's talking to people, why he's doing certain things. And also just the way that they film him. And I think the cinematography definitely helps, because they shot so many low angles of him, which made him look even more superior than he is. The way he dressed him, very one piece, big long cape, gray, very stoic in that sense that he looks like a villain, he acts like a villain. He's a person of political power and authority that you don't want to mess with. And I think he does a great job. Mm-hmm. I'd like to see Ben in an actual nice role, but he's so good at playing such a dislikable villain. You're like, how can Robin kill him?
Yeah, I think it would be an interesting movie to flip that trope on its head, certainly. But I did appreciate him. Let me ask you this before we move on to the technical aspects of the movie. What was your favorite action sequence?
I loved it when they had. I really had two, but the one that like really stood out to me because I wasn't really expecting it was when they raided the mines. And there was a whole horse chasing sequence and like and the whole town fighting back and stuff. I like that because I wasn't expecting it. And you're like, oh crap, it's really going down. When they're physically just beating the crap out of these helpless people in the mines just for money. I thought that was very well done.
Yeah, one of the I thought the ending scene for sure was really well done. I appreciated when they were trying to loot the treasury, hit them where it hurts type of thing. And even though it went wrong, they sent a message and so forth. And I thought that was a good little bit because just the way Little John had everything sort of orchestrated where the fire started, then which was kind of a foreshadow of what would happen in the final battle as well.
Yeah.
So a lot, I thought for the most part the action played really well.
Yeah, and I enjoyed the Crusades at the beginning of the movie because that like really set the action sequences because I was like, oh crap, if this is Crusades in the first 10 minutes of the film, I can't imagine what the finale is going to be. And the cool thing about the Crusades is it established like how good of an archer Robin Hood is already. And what was probably the equivalent of a 50 cal, but with arrows.
Yeah.
I thought that was pretty awesome.
I'm surprised. The one thing that I would kind of nitpick is I would like to see a couple more sword fights. He's always got his arrows and whatnot, which is great. He's known for that, but he was also a great swordsman too. So that was the only thing missing for me. All right, let's talk about the technical aspects of this. The director, Otto Bathurst, British guy, has done things such as Black Mirror, Peaky Blinders. So, one of the things that he talks about is, I have this weird hate for most period filmmaking. For me, I want to see a story that actually has purpose and resonance to me in my life rather than just looking back for the sake of looking back. I also never quite understand why filmmakers tend to change the way they make a film dependent on the film you're making. Your audience is a 21st century audience, whether you're telling a story about cavemen or aliens. So you can definitely see that sentiment in this movie.
He's telling an old story.
For a 21st century audience, which unfortunately is one of the biggest nitpicks as far as critics that have against it. But again, I didn't really mind it.
No, I didn't mind it either because, yeah, it's an old story, but the themes are still relevant today. Political power, draining your common folk people of money, and the way that things go about. I think those are still universal themes.
Very much so. And some would argue, especially in America with Trump, that it might be worse than ever.
Right.
I'm not saying right. I'm just saying that it's certainly a climate. America is a nation divided, for better or worse. Okay. So, interestingly enough, so they shot in Croatia, and then one of the sets eventually, like they shot a lot of stuff in Croatia, and then eventually one of the sets actually had a fire, right? Yeah, so they had to move production for the last few scenes over to France. So a British film set in Croatia and France.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of filmmaking. You can generally film completely somewhere different, and it's a stand-in for the actual place. I didn't mind it whatsoever because it's not really about location. It's about the characters and the story. And it felt true because there were moments where you saw they were in Sherwood Forest, but they didn't like fully acknowledge that was Sherwood Forest. Like, oh, this is an interesting woods. I'm like, yeah, we know what woods those are. And I liked it because visually it showed enough of what we already know is in the Robin Hood story, like the certain places.
Yeah, and it felt like a city that was of importance. Like Nottingham it was always the setting. But even in like Prince of Thieves, it doesn't feel like a city. You know what I mean? It's very rural. I can never say rural.
Yeah, rural. You definitely saw the different lives in the different worlds, from the rich, definitely in like the castle, palace place, compared to the poor that's in the mines. Visually different. One's completely dark, one's completely luxurious and warm in different colors. So I think the locations definitely set the different environments of the people that we're facing throughout the entire film.
And everything had to be overall 1/3 historically correct, 1/3 contemporary, and 1/3 futuristic. So it's an interesting mix, and like I said, that's why it feels like a very much like alternate universe in that regard. And certainly visually it works in that sense. Now, we've been talking about the archery. YouTube sensation Lars Anderson of Denmark was hired to teach the cast archery, which you don't often hear a YouTube star teaching actors, much in that. Certainly not from a martial arts standpoint.
No, but we're always hearing that they bring in like professional consultants with whatever skill craft. Like we just talked Creed 2, and we had professional boxers that help with the training. So it's not new for Hollywood to bring in people who are, professionals in their craft. So I like that, because they don Lars as the real Legolas. For those who don't know Legolas and who've been living under a rock, he is the elf in Lord of the Rings who's great at archery. I like that because it did the real archery that we see in the movie. I was like, that's some real skill. And the actual technical, it's like, if you throw the bow on this side, it cuts your time by a half a second. If you do multiple in one hand, that cuts it down even more. So like they did have actual archery skills in this that I was like, oh, this is cool. Maybe I should take up archery.
Yeah, it certainly made archery very cool. My comment about Lars was simply the fact that like you don't hear much about a YouTube sensation. You know what I mean? Like
right.
When you talk about blending in 21st century aspects into filmmaking, the fact that like as an archer you can be a YouTube sensation, it's just great. What a day and age we live in. That's all.
Yeah, you can just go to the internet and find the best person out there.
Absolutely, and even the horses themselves, they need to be very well trained horses that could do tight turns and so forth.
That horse chase scene, sorry to cut you. That horse chase scene was awesome, and especially there was a line where like, get the horse. I was like, no, don't get the horse. Shoot. I was like, Peter's not going to be happy with this movie. But I think even the horses played a great part in this film.
Yeah, I think the dangerous stuff, I could kind of see that it was visually affected, right? It was an actual horse at that point. So, but yeah, I thought very thrilling. Like they're on the rooftops of things and so forth. And I think this is one of the final ones, right? Right when they're kind of saving Maid Marian, and she realizes that it's Robin Hood, but when they throw the cart and then the horse kind of flips. It almost felt like a car chase just on horses.
But on horse.
So kudos to them. I mean, I think one of the benefits, we talked about this a lot, like when you do visual effects, it helps when you have it at night or dark, because then you can mask it a little bit easier for more realistic. And it certainly looked realistic, but at those moments, it wasn't a real horse.
Yeah, you can. Oh, well, we know that, but I think the horses did a great job in the chase sequence. That's for sure. Because I personally, as a regular audience member, did not expect that.
And, you go back to, you brought up Lord of the Rings. Remember Aragorn's love interest? I'm blanking on her name. Arryn. And the very first one, when they had the whole pyramid horse chasing to the river? Yeah, absolutely. I think, like, as great as that was, at least that was not in an open field, but certainly an open. You don't have to make these tight turns. This, you're going upstairs and everything like that. That's a lot of that's some skill right there in terms of horseback riding.
Just riding horse is a skill alone. So
absolutely. Okay, so let's talk about the music. thought the music overall played nice. I don't know. It wasn't necessarily the most memorable, but at the same time, I think it serviced the movie quite well.
Yeah, I noticed the music the most during all the action scenes, especially when he's trying to set the statement and he gets caught and now he's just like trying to fight his way out. That's when I noticed the music the most.
It had, in those moments when it had a very deliberate rhythm, even though things were speeding up. And it felt like it was building to something, and it was very orchestral and whatnot. So yeah, I agree with you. Those were very powerful moments, and I thought the music, it was almost like a beating heartbeat. So it set the pace. Mm-hmm. And by the way, Joseph Trapanese is the composer of the music. So.
Yeah, I thought the music was great though, because it didn't seem like old-timey classical music with the orchestra. It did seem, this is where I feel like the 21st century does hearken to the music, because it felt modern.
Yeah. And what it didn't do was use like actual songs with lyrics. Like, it was still composition, but just modernized composition. Because I think if it went like all of a sudden started using like Trey Songz or something like that, it would have been a little a step too far.
Yeah. And also, like, the thing with the problem with when you do use songs with lyrics, it automatically puts a timestamp on your movie. Yeah. It doesn't make it timeless anymore.
Yes. Unless I would argue, the only argument I would ever argue is if it's a time period and they're like, it's didactic music.
Yeah.
That, because then, although it's in that moment, it feels more universal because it's not like it's part of the scene. Anyway. Neither here nor there. I just thought I'd share either way. All right. So now this was originally supposed to come out in March, but it was pushed back to 2000. It was pushed back later of this year. For whatever reasons. You can understand now. They were unfortunately banking a lot with this movie, $100 million to make this thing. I think it just came at a bad time when you have movies like Creed and Ralph Breaks the Internet. And then even like Green Book, which is supposed to be an Oscar contender, which I haven't seen yet. I'm not sure if you have. I
haven't seen it yet.
I thought it's just bad timing part of it.
Right, and I think a March would have been a good time to release the film, but we know that this movie had a lot of scheduling problems already within Taron's schedule, which pushed this movie even further in production, which pushed everything else back. So I think timing was not on their side for this film, which is really unfortunate because visually this movie is great. Like, action-wise, it's solid. Characters and stories, there's different takes and stuff, but like overall, it's a fun film that might not get the best exposure because of the timing.
That, and also like it has an 11% on Rotten Tomatoes. Listen, I don't think it's a 90 movie, but 11
is way too low. That's being mean.
Yeah, that's it. The consensus according to Rotten Tomatoes is Robin Hood robs the rich source material, but is ultimately just another poor attempt to needlessly gussy up a classic tale with amped up action and modern special effects. Listen, there's movies you watch, at least I watch, and I'm like, this is a cash grab. This was made just to make it. Mm-hmm. And I don't necessarily feel that with this movie. I thought there was passion that went into it from all sides. Now, sure, there's some shortcomings, and we haven't necessarily highlighted all of those, but I think in the end, it's not like they just made this just to make it.
Right, and I think they definitely tried, because Jamie Foxx, Academy Award winner, and we have Taron Egerton, who is definitely up and coming in the action comedy space with all of the Kingsman movies. So I can understand why they paired these two together, because they are big in their careers right now. If you go back to Kevin Costner's, sorry, I'm going to go back to one because I only really know that one. Kevin Costner, huge in the 90s. It makes sense that they would make a movie with him as the lead. So it really depends on the Robin Hood, just the generation that's watching and the time that they release it. I understand why they made the movie now with these actors.
Yeah, and it got a B on Cinema Score, which isn't the greatest, but it's it's also not as terrible. Certainly, again, when you look at the Rotten Tomatoes score versus the cinema score, you would expect it to kind of be like an F almost with Mother, Darren Aronofsky's movie.
Ugh.
But it's not. It's a B. You would want like a B plus, A minus, but B's not bad. It's not gonna have as long legs. Now, the unfortunate part is Deadline Hollywood listed this as a box office bomb. They predicted in advance, and it's rather unfortunate. Like right now, basically, it was projected to make $15 million. It went on to debut for a 5-day total at 14.2, finishing 7th at the box office, which is obviously against the budget of $100 million, is not very great.
No, they probably won't make their money back, and they're gonna spend a long time in it. And it's like released in 2,000 plus theaters, so that's a wide release. And it's unfortunate because they're gonna play out all these screenings and still not gonna make their money back.
It's unfortunate. In all fairness, I would look forward to a second, a sequel to this.
Especially how it ended.
Yeah.
Like, oh crap! Now we have Will Scarlet as sheriff. Where do we go from there?
Yeah, I thought it worked really well overall. I thought it was fun, but it had heart. I don't know what other way to describe it. I really don't think it's as deserved as it is. You know what? Wait for it to come out on DVD if you must, or whatever, if at this point you've listened to it without seeing it. But anyway, I still recommend it. So there's a lot worse movies you can do, and trust me, we've covered them.
Oh, definitely. This one's a fun movie. It really is an actually entertaining film. I can't really think of what failed epically other than maybe the time movie release.
Yeah. All right. Well, any final thoughts before we wrap up?
I probably would watch this film again. I think there's definitely going to be a watchability factor. Just the Robin Hood story alone is fun to follow. And I liked this cast. It was fun.
It would be fun to do a marathon Robin Hood day with all the Robin Hoods.
Yeah.
So that's a suggestion to all of you. That's my final thought. Thank you for joining us. You can interact with us more directly at Serafini TV.
Yep.
Is where you can interact with Marisa. I'm at Phil Svitek. Thank you for joining us. Of course, just because our conversation is over doesn't mean it has to be over. That's what the comment section and all that is for. Down the pipeline, we've got Ralph Breaks the Internet, and we're going to be talking about Instant Family. As I mentioned at the top of the show, with the holiday schedule, everything's going to be crazy. We're probably, right now, we've been doing at a pace of 4 movies a week, which you have no idea. It sounds fun, but it can actually be quite challenging for us.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a challenge.
I know, poor us, right? We have to watch so many movies and do so much research.
First world problems.
Regardless, we're going to be here for you and doing as much as we can, so keep checking back in. Also, I recommend, we do have a long archive of past movies that we've done, so as you catch up on some of these movies in the holiday break, by all means, we encourage you to check out those anatomies. In the meantime, thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time for another Anatomy of a Movie. Bye.
From producers Maria Menounos, Kevin Undergaro, Phil Svitek, and the entire Popcorn Talk Network, we would like to thank you for tuning in. For questions or comments, be sure to visit popcorntalk.com. I'm Sir Richard Wentworth, and this has been a presentation of the Popcorn Talk Network. The views expressed herein are those of the hosts only and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Popcorn Talk Network or its owners or principals.